Seems like history's in fast forward, right? I mean, everything changing and so fast. There's something sinister in the air. China, obviously, so threatening now. In fact, the head of our Home Affairs Department, Mike Pezzullo, has issued an alarming Anzac Day warning to his staff. He told them to get ready for war. He said, today, as free nations, this is an Anzac Day message, again hear the beating drums and watch worryingly the militarisation of issues that we had until recent years thought unlikely to be catalysts for war. Let us continue to search unceasingly for the chance for peace while bracing again, yet again, for the curse of war. He didn't exactly mention China, but I think we know what he meant. It's an extraordinary warning. The Prime Minister was not backing down today when asked about it.
Do you agree with Michael Pezzullo when he says the drums of war are beating?
My goal as Prime Minister, and I know the Foreign Minister feels the same way, and the entire Cabinet, is that our objective is to pursue peace. That's what we're doing. We're pursuing peace for a free and open Indo-Pacific. But it's also at the same time designed to ensure that Australia's national interests are always advanced.
Joining me is Australia's longest serving and, in my opinion, the best Foreign Affairs Minister, Alexander Downer. Alexander Downer, it's great to catch up with you again. And Mike Pezzullo's warning, was it too theatrical? Was it too provocative, as the West Australian Premier complained today? Or do we really need this wake-up?
Well, I think it's always important to recognise that, first of all, obviously, the Australian government pursues peace. And we would hope Western governments generally would pursue peace. But that there are powers, and obviously China is premier amongst them, which want to change the status quo, and they talk about doing so through the use of force. And I particularly there refer not just to their activities in the South China Sea, but the fact that China keeps talking about taking Taiwan, or Beijing keeps talking about taking Taiwan. If China decided to try militarily to take Taiwan, it would create a very ugly and very bloody war. And countries like Japan and Australia, US allies, could very easily be drawn into that. So what should we do? What we should do is always make it perfectly clear that we're on the side of peace. But to achieve peace, anybody who might be thinking of changing the world through military means needs to understand that that will be fiercely resisted, and they shouldn't try to do that. It would never be worth their while. And that is the lesson of the 1930s. You know, Hitler just took more and more and more, and nobody did anything about it except whinge. And then that ultimately led to catastrophe.
Well, as the saying is, if you want peace, prepare for war. But there's a Chinese general, a top military from China's top military university, who's just told the Chinese military's newspaper that Australia, in wanting to resist China, we're just doing it because we're white supremacists, is using our race politics against us. We're white supremacists. And he says, don't worry, Australia's not actually that strong. If we try to intervene in Taiwan, he says, we will just hurt ourselves. Well, given all that, I mean, what do we do? Do we just, sit back and do nothing, or what?
Well, I think to a point, you know this from social media, when people dish out abuse, 9 times out of 10, it's just best to ignore it. Since he's a general, we will use a military metaphor. They just rubber bullets off a Sherman tank. It doesn't matter what he says, really. But I think it's an old cry, and the West, particularly the Americans, are responsible for this. Anybody you don't like, and for whatever reason you don't like them or like what they've said, you just call them a racist. What do they want to do? Get into a debate about whether there's any racism in China towards Africans who live in China? Where's that sort of debate going to get us? Let's not start it. Let's just leave it alone.
Yes, I know, but I find it interesting they're exploiting now our own internal ideological wars to join in helping to weaken the West. And France, speaking of exactly that, Alexander Downer.
Say something there? One of the problems for the West is it has to stand up to these authoritarian regimes, and it has surely learned that from past generations. It has to make it perfectly clear that these authoritarian regimes can't just walk over us and take our pacific and decent instincts for granted. But the West doesn't help itself by being so internally divided, and all this cancel culture, critical race theory and so on, which emanates from the East Coast and West Coast of the United States. It's doing the West more broadly a huge amount of damage because it's dividing us against ourselves.
Well, speaking of exactly that, in France, we've had, well, last week, another Islamist terrorist attack, a female police officer killed, stabbed in the neck by an illegal immigrant, a Muslim man. And this is after so many other Islamist terror attacks, including the beheading last year of a teacher who showed students a cartoon of Muhammad. Now, 20 retired French generals and 1,000 other soldiers have signed an extraordinary joint letter warning that the French army might have to step in to fight Islamism and avert a civil war. They complain about political, all the woke culture weakening France, and said, who would have predicted 10 years ago that a professor would one day be beheaded when he left college? If nothing is done, laxity will continue to spread inexorably in society, ultimately causing an explosion and the intervention of our active comrades, the military, in a perilous mission of protecting our civilizational values and safeguarding of our compatriots. Alexander, that's just amazing language and rather frightening. What do you make of all that?
Well, I'm not necessarily going to subscribe to that language, but inevitably these terrorist attacks in France and these attacks are perpetrated in the main, not universally, but in the main by migrants. And the most recent one where actually I don't think she was a police officer, I think she was an administrative officer in a police station in Rambouillet, 30 or so kilometres from Paris. Well, he was a Tunisian by all accounts and had been an illegal migrant who had eventually been granted residency. It's okay. It's okay to say, for particularly people on the political left, to say there should just be universal rights of migration anywhere, anytime. But honestly, in the end, it is going to cause a lot of resistance. And my view is, I thought this at the time, with this most recent terrorist attack, not the worst that's ever happened, but this most recent terrorist attack is going to play straight into the hands of Marine Le Pen, the right-wing candidate who's running against Emmanuel Macron at next year's presidential election. People will only put up with this sort of thing for so long, and the public will become more and more resistant and I'll tell you what, they'll become more and more intolerant if there isn't proper control of immigration and proper scrutiny of people who are migrating into different countries.
I think you will see it in France, and you could next see it in Germany. Alexander Downer, thank you so much indeed for your time.
It's a pleasure, Andrew.
Thankfully, in Australia, though, the Islamist threat seems much lower than it was, or I don't know, maybe I'm kidding myself, because it was an Anzac Day message, another one this year. This one ignored in the media. It was from the radical Islamist group Hizbut, which has hundreds of members here, led by this Jordanian-born, anti-Jewish, hate-preaching extremist. Why we ever let him in, heaven knows.
الإسلام وأمة الإسلام يتعرضون لمحرقة من نفس المجرمين، لكن لا يجوز لك أن تتحدث عن محرقة المسلمين. فقط المحرقة هي تلك التي يزعمون أو يضخمون أو يكبرون أو يكذبون أو يحلبون حلبا من أجل أن.
And here is part of his group's Anzac Day message, a threat. Australia shares in the crimes of America, participating in a war in Afghanistan that itself is the greatest crime. It is only a matter of time, he says, before the West's suffocating footprint over the Muslim world is permanently lifted and the criminal regimes will be held to account. So, we have taken in people like this preacher who think we're a criminal regime attacking Muslims and need to be held to account. No good can come from that.